EVO. On the last days of December 1986, the world was rehearsing its optimism. Television anchors were already talking about fresh starts, about renewal, about the fiction that when a calendar page flips, consequences magically reset. But in a quiet Connecticut town where the nights froze solid and the river ran black beneath its skin of ice, a woman was already gone. There was no siren, no shattered glass, no scream that carried. Only the absence of a voice that had been speaking, making plans, and waiting for Christmas to pass before she changed her life. And by the time anyone realized she was missing, the year was already ending. This is the story of Helle Crafts and the murder that forced American justice to ask whether silence itself could be considered proof. Welcome back to The Devil Within, and Happy New Year. Tonight's episode isn't about a mystery that was never solved. It's about one that was solved just enough, while still leaving behind questions so profound that even justice couldn't answer them. This is the mysterious case of Helle Crafts. Chapter 1. The Woman Who Would Not Disappear. In 1986, Newtown, Connecticut felt like the kind of place where bad things simply didn't happen. Now, this wasn't literally true, of course, but people believed it in the same way people believe that seatbelts make them immortal. Not because logic demands it, but because life feels easier when danger belongs, over there, somewhere else. It was a suburban refuge, good schools, quiet roads, houses that sat back from the street, intentionally polite. It was a place built around the illusion that if you played by the rules, if you worked hard, raised your kids right, kept your lawn tidy, well, then maybe the universe owed you safety in return. And existing inside that illusion, moving in and out of Newtown like someone who lived in two worlds at once, was Helle Crafts. Helle had been born in Denmark, a country shaped by social structure, by shared responsibility, and the idea that systems are supposed to take care of people. She grew up in a place where neighbors knew each other, where family mattered, and where there was a kind of common trust in the institutions that surround daily life. Her path wasn't dramatic, it wasn't chaotic. She didn't run from something. Instead, she stepped outward, deliberately, curiously. First to work as a live-in nanny, then she got into aviation, becoming a flight attendant. Now, that wasn't just a job. Being a flight attendant is a choice. It means independence, it means movement. And for Helle, it meant that while most people lived their lives on the ground, her life stretched across time zones and continents. She learned to navigate airports and cruise schedules, exhaustion, strangers. She knew what it meant to be composed, even when she wasn't sleeping enough, even when passengers weren't behaving. She understood calm under pressure. And then she met Richard Crafts. He was an Eastern Airlines pilot, confident, self-contained, a man who was used to control, both in the cockpit and increasingly, kind of everywhere else. They got married in 1975. They bought the house. They settled in Newtown. They had 3 kids. And through all of it, Helle kept her job. She kept flying. And that detail matters because she didn't give up her career to become an accessory to someone else's life. She was working flights while raising children, balancing jet lag with school events, and building something stable while being constantly on the move. But as we know, stability is complicated, and over time, cracks formed. Helle noticed things. Suspicious phone calls, emotional distance, shifts in Richard's behavior that didn't feel really random. Now, she wasn't paranoid. She was just observant. And she was tired of being reassured in ways that felt like dismissal. And when she finally confronted him, he didn't exactly calm her fears. He got angry. And anger has a way of clarifying truth. So Helle did something many women at the time were discouraged from doing. She documented. She hired a private investigator, Keith Mayo. And she didn't hire him to confirm her fantasies. She hired him to confirm reality. And within weeks, Mayo had the goods. Pictures. Richard kissing another flight attendant, go figure, outside her New Jersey apartment. Proof. Real. Undeniable. Can't be gaslit proof. And from that moment on, Helle's thinking changed. Knowing something in your gut is one thing. Being able to hold it in your hands and look at it is another. So yeah, she met with a divorce attorney, and she quietly began planning her exit. She weighed custody, finances, immigration status, whether she could leave safely without losing the kids. And in conversations with friends, she started saying the sentence that stops your breath when you hear it. If something happens to me, don't assume it was an accident. Now, that wasn't melodrama. That was risk assessment. Because she knew who she was living with, and she knew what he was capable of when control slipped through his hands. But still, she didn't run. And people love to ask, why didn't she just leave? As if leaving is a magic door you step through without consequence. As if men who become furious about losing control are simply just going to shrug their shoulders and move on with their lives. Helle didn't just leave because she had children and because Christmas was approaching. Because she was trying, genuinely, not to detonate the family just before the holidays. So yeah, she chose to wait. Wait until after Christmas. Wait until the kids had one more normal, memorable Christmas morning. Just wait until the new year. And waiting became the cruelest decision she would ever make. On November 18, 1986, Helle returned from a long international flight from Frankfurt. She was exhausted. Friends dropped her at home. It was one of those ordinary gestures that later feels loaded with meaning because of what comes next. That night, a snowstorm rolled in. And that was the last time anyone outside that house ever saw her alive. Richard told people different versions of what happened next. She went to Denmark. Other people, he told she went to the Canary Islands with a friend. And still other people, he said, I don't know where she went. She just left, man. But Helle wouldn't go anywhere without her passport. She wouldn't go anywhere without luggage. And she certainly wouldn't abandon her children or walk away from a career that she had worked decades to maintain. And the women in her life, the ones that she'd confided in, they knew it. They called, they asked questions, they refused to be soothed because they remember what she said. If something happens to me, don't assume it was an accident. So when silence stretched from hours into days and days into weeks, it no longer felt like absence. It felt like she was erased. And that's where this story truly begins. Not in a courtroom, not with a headline, and not with that myth about the woodchipper, but with a woman who spent her life crossing oceans only to disappear in the quietest suburb imaginable. A flight attendant. She's used to turbulence. But she was suddenly gone. And the people who loved her refused to believe that she simply flew away. Chapter 2. The house that wouldn't stop talking. At first, the disappearance of Helle Crafts wasn't treated like a disappearance at all. It looked, at least to law enforcement, like inconvenience, like drama between a husband and wife that would eventually, resolve itself. Women leave, they thought. They take some space. They go home to see their families. They cool off, then they come back. And if you were inclined to believe Richard Crafts, Helle had gone kind of everywhere, either Denmark or the Canary Islands, a different place with her friends, somewhere maybe he couldn't quite remember. Each time someone questioned him, the story shifted just enough to avoid collapsing, like a tent held up by poles that kept bending. But there were people in Helle's life who refused to be comforted. They were flight attendants, they were neighbors, close friends, women who understood the emotional choreography of marriages like hers, and who remembered the sentence, again, Helle had said with a terrible kind of calm. Don't assume it was an accident. Don't assume it was an accident. So they kept calling, they kept visiting, and when the answer stopped making sense, they did something else. They called the one person that Helle already trusted. The Private Eye Keith Mayo. Now, Mayo had been with Helle from the beginning, long before she vanished, documenting Richard's affair, photographing that kiss outside the New Jersey apartment, gathering proof that Helle's fears were grounded in reality. So when she disappeared, Mayo didn't have to start at zero. He started with the husband whose temper was known, a house full of children suddenly without their mother, and a blizzard that had rolled through the night that she vanished. He went to the local police. At first, they shrugged. Richard was, after all, known to them. He was a part-time volunteer police officer, someone who wore the uniform, someone who had cultural proximity to authority. And there was, as yet, no body, no blood-soaked living room, no sign of struggle exploding across the house. Helle, they suggested, would probably come back. But Mayo didn't accept that. He went higher. He went past the local cops. He went above their skepticism and straight to the county prosecutor. And slowly, reluctantly, the case was handed off to the Connecticut State Police. And that changed everything. Because state investigators don't rely on familiarity. They rely on procedure. On December 26th, while Richard took the children to Florida, troopers executed a search warrant on the Crafts home. From the outside, the house looked polite. Winter lights, quiet yard, nothing dramatic. Inside, the quiet began to fall apart. The first thing that stood out was the carpet. In the master bedroom, pieces had been cut away, not ripped suddenly, but removed with intention, like someone had carefully excised a problem and replaced it with absence, where a stain used to be. The family nanny, when questioned, remembered the stain clearly. Dark, grapefruit-sized. There one day, gone the next. Investigators found small blood spray on the mattress, not enough to stage a horror film, not enough to make the house scream, just enough to whisper. And then they noticed something else. Something that wasn't there. The freezer. Richard's credit card records showed that he had recently purchased one. Large, new, the kind that you don't, misplace. But it wasn't in the house. It wasn't in the garage. In fact, it wasn't anywhere that anyone could locate. Alongside the freezer were other purchases. Bed sheets, a comforter, a chainsaw, and the rental record for a woodchipper. Now, separately, those things could be explained. Together, they suggested design. But police still didn't have a cohesive narrative. They had fragments, and fragments only become dangerous when they begin to align. Then a man named Joseph Hine called. Joseph worked for the town. He drove a snowplow during storms, and he'd seen something odd the night Helle vanished, the night Connecticut was swallowed by a snowstorm. A truck, a rented woodchipper, parked along the shoreline of Lake Zor. Richard Crafts was the man standing beside it. Hine didn't know at the time that a woman had gone missing. He didn't understand what he was looking at. Only later, after news spread, did the memory change shape and become something like evidence. He led investigators right back to the spot. It was quiet now. Winter still. The kind of place you'd pass without noticing if you didn't know what you were looking for. And on that shoreline, the case stopped whispering. They found metal fragments, shredded, twisted. They found bone chips. They found human tissue, roughly 3 ounces. They found a fingernail painted pink. They found the crown of a tooth. They found 2,600 strands of blonde hair, the kind of blonde you get from peroxide, the kind of blonde worn by flight attendants who need to look composed at altitude. And blood type O, same as Helle Crafts. Divers searched the water. At the bottom of the lake was a chainsaw. The serial number had been ground off, an attempt at erasing provenance. But in the lab, the number was recovered anyway. Technology, patience, and chemistry brought back the digits like a ghost. The saw traced straight back to Richard. At this point, forensic scientist Dr. Henry Lee enters the narrative. Calm, clinical, methodical. He supervised the process of turning debris into meaning. And the question was simple. Could a woodchipper produce bone fragments like these? To test the theory, investigators used a pig carcass. After the machine devoured it, the resulting bone chips showed the same markings, the same patterns, the same mechanical violence. Piece by piece, the story began assembling itself. Investigators believed Richard struck Helle twice in the head with a blunt object, enough force to kill or nearly kill. He stored her body in the new freezer until it froze solid. Then he dismembered her with a chainsaw and fed those pieces through the woodchipper, spraying the fragments out into the snow, where they vanished into winter beneath the hum of a rented machine. Science can feel cold, but in cases like this, it's the only language that tells the truth. On January 13, 1987, with no intact body, the Connecticut State Medical Examiner issued a death certificate, and almost immediately, Richard Crafts was arrested. The house that had worked so hard to look normal had told its story. Slowly, reluctantly, but it told it anyway. Chapter 3. Proving a murder without a body. The arrest of Richard Crafts didn't end the story. It began a much harder one. Because American courts are not built for mysteries. They're built for narratives. Prosecutors prefer bodies. They prefer autopsies. They prefer neatly labeled photographs that tell juries where, how, and when violence happened. But in Helle's case, they had none of that. What they had were fragments, bone chips the size of fingernails, a crown of a tooth, blonde hair, human tissue, a chainsaw, a shoreline, and a line of logic so brutal it almost sounded theoretical. But this case was not theoretical. A woman had existed, and now she didn't. That simple truth had to be translated into proof. And the forensic team, led by Dr. Henry Lee, became the quiet backbone of the prosecution. He walked investigators and then prosecutors and then eventually a jury through something that was at once deeply scientific and profoundly human. How you reconstruct a life from what's left. There were purchase receipts, the freezer that vanished, the bedding, the chainsaw, the woodchipper rental. There was the snowplow driver's memory of the truck at the lake. There was the nanny's story about the missing stain in the carpet. There were the bone fragments and the hair and the blood type. And there was one more thing that mattered deeply. Dental records. The tiny tooth crown recovered from the snowy shoreline near the water matched Helle Crafts. That allowed the medical examiner's office to do something almost unheard of in Connecticut at the time. Issue a death certificate without a body. That single sheet of paper unlocked everything. It meant prosecutors could finally charge Richard Crafts with murder. But charging someone is different from convicting them. The case went to trial in 1988. It moved to New London because the local publicity was already impossible to ignore. The courtroom wasn't sensational in the way some true crime legends become. There were no gory displays, there were no dramatic confessions, just a slow, methodical attempt to explain a life that was erased violently. Prosecutors argued that Richard had motive. Helle had uncovered the affair. She had spoken to a divorce attorney. She'd hired a private investigator. Money, custody, reputation, all at risk. And unlike Helle, Richard was not inclined to wait until after Christmas and negotiate. They argued opportunity, a snowstorm, children asleep, a house both isolated and familiar. They argued behavior, contradictory stories, calm where there should have been panic, lies so unnecessary that they almost sounded bored. Then they argued science, not theatrical science. This was careful. It was dry. It was relentless. The chainsaw recovered from the lake bore microscopic traces, hair, bone, and blood. Even after the serial number had been ground off, investigators restored it and traced the purchase directly back to Richard Crafts. The woodchipper theory, which had sounded like rumor when first whispered through town, became horrifyingly precise. To test whether the bone fragments by the river could have come from the machine like the one Richard rented, it was explained to the jury that to test whether the bone fragments by the river could have come from a machine like the one Richard rented, investigators ran that pig carcass experiment. That wasn't designed for spectacle. It was designed to answer a question. Would bone, human bone, after being fed through a wood chipper, would it look like this? And the answer was yes. And then there was the shoreline. 3 ounces of human tissue doesn't sound like enough to convict anyone of anything until you realize what those ounces represent. A body atomized into winter, scattered beneath snow, shoveled away like trash. And the defense did exactly what they were supposed to do. They told the jury, hey, no body, no murder. They didn't need to explain where Helle was, and they didn't try. Instead, they attacked the chain of logic. They suggested misinterpretations. They implied possibilities. They leaned on the unease any reasonable person might feel when asked to convict someone of murder without a corpse to mourn. And it seemed to work, at least for a while. The first trial dragged on for 54 days. The jury deliberated for 17 days. And then one juror, only one, refused to vote guilty. Not because she loved Richard, not because she mocked Helle, because she was afraid of being wrong. So the judge declared a mistrial. Most communities would have let the case evaporate there. Too complicated, too fragile, too prone to doubt. But Connecticut didn't. The state tried Richard again, this time in Norwalk. The evidence didn't change, the science didn't change, the story didn't soften, but something in the presentation did. The prosecution wasn't asking the jury to imagine the impossible anymore. They were asking them to recognize that the impossible had already happened. A woman had vanished. Her physical traces were found at a lake. Her husband had lied. His purchases matched the means of disposal. His timeline aligned with absence. And maybe most importantly, no one else benefited from her disappearance. In November of 1989, the second jury returned a verdict. Guilty. Richard Crafts was sentenced to 50 years in prison. He maintained his innocence and still does, and for many, that denial feels less like moral outrage and more like control. One final refusal to give Helle what he took. Acknowledgement. Decades passed, and then in January of 2020, the story did something unsettling. It breathed again. Because Richard Crafts, through statutory good time, work credits, and the strange arithmetic of American sentencing, was released from prison and sent to a halfway house. The man who murdered his wife without leaving a body behind walked out of custody. Now that doesn't erase the verdict, it doesn't erase the science or the shoreline or the chainsaw rusting at the bottom of the lake. But it does force a question. What does justice mean in a case built on fragments? The murder of Helle Crafts is often remembered for the woodchipper. It shouldn't be. It should be remembered for something far quieter and infinitely more unsettling. A woman saw danger clearly. She said it out loud. She asked the world not to assume accidents. And the world, for a very long time, almost did. Her story became a legal precedent, a forensic milestone, a cautionary tale for detectives everywhere. But long before all of that, she was a flight attendant and a mother, an immigrant, and a woman trying to survive a marriage that had turned into something cold. The devil in this case isn't mythology. It's calculation, patience, and the belief that if you grind someone down into small enough pieces, literally or metaphorically, the truth will never be able to reassemble itself. In this case, it did. Not entirely, not perfectly, but enough. Enough to say her name. Enough to insist that even without a body, a life can still demand justice. There's a temptation, once a jury speaks, to believe that a story's finished. We like verdicts. We like the gavel. We like the illusion that when we label something, guilty, convicted, sentenced, the human wreckage organizes itself into something orderly. But the murder of Helle Crafts refuses to behave that way. It's not a story about spectacle. It's not a story about a machine. It's a story about a life erased. In the way science, persistence, and the stubborn love of people around her refused to let that erasure hold. Helle was not defined by the way she died. She was defined by the way she lived. A daughter of Denmark, a flight attendant, a mother of 3, someone who saw danger coming and tried, in the small ways available to her, to say, please don't look away if this goes wrong. And then it did. The devil within, in this case, is not supernatural. It doesn't growl and it doesn't roar. It plans, it calculates. It convinces itself that if the body disappears, the sin disappears with it. But the fragments remained, the shoreline remembered, the carpet remembered, the tooth remembered, the hair remembered. And the truth, broken, partial, and fragile, eventually found its way back into the light. Justice did not come cleanly, and it almost didn't come at all. But it finally came. And that was because people refused to accept the easiest possible explanation. That women who vanished must have simply chosen to leave. Helle didn't leave. She was taken. And saying that clearly, out loud, that's the smallest piece of dignity that we can return to her. So as another year turns over, here's the wish. That when someone tells us they're afraid, we believe them the first time. That we stop asking people to wait until after the holidays, after things calm down, after it's convenient, to be safe. That silence is no longer mistaken for peace, and absence is no longer mistaken for choice. And that no one, ever again, has to disappear completely in order to be heard. If you're enjoying The Devil Within, please follow, rate, and review the show on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you're listening right now. It truly helps. And share this episode with someone who cares about stories where the answers weren't easy. Write to us anytime at info@evocreative.com. We read everything and we respond to most. And explore the full EVO Creative slate at evocreative.com. Thank you for spending time with me and with this story. Happy New Year, and we'll see you next time on The Devil Within. Until then, Happy New Year and stay safe. The Devil Within is an EVO production, recorded live at Bel Air Studios in Los Angeles, California. For The Devil Within, I'm your writer and host, Brandon Morgan.